Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Julio Jones trade from a fantasy football perspective. Yesterday, I gave you guys a quick breakdown, a kind of quick thoughts when it came to fantasy football, but I didn't really go into the whole situation. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys the full trade details, kind of talking about that, and then talking about the big players from each team, the Falcons and the Titans, and talk about how Julio Jones switching teams affects each player on those teams for fantasy football. So if you guys do end up enjoying this video and you want more fantasy football content, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, because not only is it free, I put out content every single day trying to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football league. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first, we're going to be talking about the trade details, which are going to be at the bottom right of the screen. The Titans deal for Julio Jones. The hashtag Falcons get a 2022 second rounder and a 2023 fourth round pick. The Titans get Julio Jones and a sixth rounder in 2023. The Titans take on Julio Jones' salary of $15.3 million in 2021, as well as the rest of the deal. The Falcons have $7.75 million in dead money this year. The reason why the trade took this long to happen is because of the dead money. After June 1st, the money ends up changing and is less for the Falcons, so they would be more likely to trade him after that date, which obviously ended up happening yesterday. Again, if you kind of want the quick rundown of how I felt kind of in yesterday's video, I love this trade for both sides. I feel as though the Atlanta Falcons probably were not going to end up getting a first round pick from any other team, and they should be pretty happy with getting a second for a guy that is relatively old. Now, again, I think Julio still has maybe 3-4 years left of being one of the better wide receivers in the NFL, but again, you never know with injuries. Anything can end up happening. For the Titans, they only pay a second round pick for, in my opinion, a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL at this point in his career. Will he still be that 2-3 years down the road? That is to be unknown, but based upon what we know right now, if you're looking at it as just like a 1-year deal, kind of, because that's how you got to look at it for fantasy football, this is a very good trade for the Titans, and I expect the Titans to be a very good team in 2021. So the first player to be talking about today, obviously, is on the Titans. We're going to go first with the Titans, and then we're going to be talking about, obviously, the Atlanta Falcons and how this affects them. So Julio Jones is the first guy to be talking about. To me, I would dub this as a neutral move. I don't feel as though Julio Jones stock really goes up super high, right? Because on Atlanta, he's the #1 wide receiver there, right? He's the guy in Atlanta. Matt Ryan, while isn't the greatest quarterback in the NFL, is still a solid quarterback at this point in his career. So it would have been pretty all right in Atlanta, right? He still probably would have potentially finished as a top 12 guy. He would have been a very safe pick in fantasy, and I would have loved to pick him on my team if he was in Atlanta. Now, in Tennessee, I feel as though he's probably demoted to maybe the wide receiver 2 on this team, but I feel like him and A.J. Brown are going to both be seeing a lot of targets as long as they both stay healthy, and that Julio Jones should also have that top 12 potential in Atlanta. So I don't really feel like this move really helps out Julio too much, and I also don't feel like it really hurts Julio at all. The next guy to be talking about is wide receiver A.J. Brown of the Tennessee Titans. Now, A.J. Brown last year was getting fed the rock. He had 106 targets in his sophomore season, 70 receptions, over 1,000 receiving yards with 1,075. He had 11 total touchdowns as well, and was a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy. From a points per game perspective, he only ended up playing in 14 games, so he was much better from a points per game perspective because this guy was very, very dominant, and that was with Corey Davis on the team. Now, I'm going to dub this as a neutral move, but if I'm being honest with you, I think the upside of A.J. Brown is still just as high, but I would have felt a lot more comfortable saying maybe A.J. Brown could actually be the #1 wide receiver in fantasy football if they didn't end up adding Julio Jones. Why is this? Because Corey Davis ended up leaving the team. Anthony Firkser is not necessarily really a known target on that team. They don't really have all that much outside of A.J. Brown, but now with Julio Jones, I think the fact that A.J. Brown may somehow see 200 targets or something crazy is really out the window. I still believe that this is good, though, because now they're not going to have to double cover A.J. Brown. Before, maybe A.J. Brown was going to draw that double coverage because he's the only wide receiver out there on the field, but now with Julio Jones there, obviously, that won't be the case. Maybe they'll end up doubling Julio Jones, and that'll help out A.J. Brown even more. Next up, we have the quarterback of the team, Ryan Tannehill. Now, Ryan Tannehill is kind of one of those players that, to me, just gets an unnecessary amount of hate, and maybe it's not even hate per se, right? It's more just no one really talks about him being any good. Because even if people aren't really hating on Ryan Tannehill, they aren't really giving him the praises that, in my opinion, he deserves. He was a top 10 quarterback in fantasy football last season. And obviously, while his time at Miami, as a Dolphins fan, I thought Tannehill was pretty solid. He had his ups and downs, but he never really proved it. So it did make sense why going to Tennessee, people were kind of like, that's just an move. He's going to sit behind Mariota. He's going to be a backup the rest of his career, and it is what it is. But obviously, the complete opposite happens. Mariota starting, and then they realize, hey, Mariota fucking sucks. Tannehill is actually pretty good. They throw Tannehill in. 2019, he plays well. 2020, obviously, plays well again. Finishes as a top 10 fantasy football quarterback. Obviously, this is great for Ryan Tannehill. He's not going to have to force feed A.J. Brown. He's going to have A.J. Brown as well as Julio Jones out there to throw the ball to. This offense is going to be able to move the ball so effectively. And another thing that could actually help out all of these players is the fact that I'm not too sold in on the Tennessee Titans defense. While they're not necessarily completely shit and do have the potential to be pretty good, if the defense plays like last year, I don't really see them really being that great of a defense, and the offense is going to have to move the ball down the field to continue to try and win the game. And if that is the case and that happens again, all of these guys are going to be very good for fantasy football. Obviously, if an injury happens or something, you just can't fucking predict that. But based upon this offense right now, with Julio, with A.J. Brown, with Derrick Henry, I mean, the upside for Ryan Tannehill is super duper high as the quarterback on the team who is not necessarily even going in most people's mind as a top 10 quarterback. He's a guy you can draft much later, and his upside to me is probably better than the guys going around him in that range, especially since a guy like Matt Ryan goes around him, and Matt Ryan just lost the best wide receiver to ever grace the Atlanta Falcons, probably one of the best players in Atlanta Falcons history. Next guy up here is Anthony Firkser. Now, Anthony Firkser was a tight end for the team. Maybe most people don't know who he is, but with Jonnu Smith leaving, the door was kind of wide open for Anthony Firkser to have a nice role in this offense. While I think he still could be good, this move is down tremendous for him. His upside has been taken and thrown down the fucking gutter because the thought was, hey, he's the second best option to throw the ball to on the team. This is going to be Anthony Firkser's season, and frankly, it is not going to be because he is not going to be getting the ball enough to warrant that. While Jonnu Smith was having his ups and downs, right, due to injury and just due to kind of not playing the greatest week in, week out, he still was pretty solid, and you do know that Ryan Tannehill is going to throw the ball to the tight end position, but now I feel like I'm not really even looking for him. He's kind of off my board at this point as a super high upside tight end. Final guy to be talking about on the Tennessee Titans is Derrick Henry. I believe that this is also great for him. If the offense is able to move the ball so effectively down the field, if they're able to get to the 5, to the 10, where you can just jam the ball to Derrick Henry and he can walk directly into the end zone because the guy is so much bigger than the people trying to tackle him, then obviously this move would be good for any running back on a team, especially going to be very good for a guy who's not even really a pass-catching threat on the team. This isn't going to take away any targets from Derrick Henry because Derrick Henry is not a pass-catching running back. While they say that he's been working on his pass-catching, while he's going to be getting more catches, I never will really see that coming. Derrick Henry now could run for even more yards than he did last year, and he ran for 2,000 yards last season. I think that this makes Derrick Henry much, much safer because maybe the thought process with just A.J. Brown was, hey, maybe they could stack the box, and now they're going to have to force it to A.J. Brown, make some mistakes, and then the defense can play very well and read this offense. But now you have 3 players that are top 10 players at their position, in my opinion, on the offense. You have, or maybe even 4 with Tannehill, right? You have A.J. Brown, who's a top 10 receiver. You have Julio Jones, who could be a top 10 wide receiver still. And you have Derrick Henry, who's probably a top 5, maybe even top 3 running back in the NFL. So it's very hard to stop all of these guys on this offense. And like I said, if they're able to maniacally walk their way up the field, dot up the defense, and then you just hand it to Derrick Henry a couple of times, he walks into the end zone, and you're just very happy with Derrick Henry week in, week out. Some people may spin this for, hey, this is worse for Derrick Henry because maybe Julio Jones will steal the touchdowns, but this just in, Julio Jones, not a touchdown guy. This dude is allergic to scoring. He needs the scoring touchdown fucking vaccine because he literally cannot score a touchdown to save the guy's life. He'll be wide open in the end zone. The ball will be thrown perfectly to him, and for some reason he can't catch it, but all over the field, this guy can toe tap everywhere, make every single catch of one of the better wide receivers ever in NFL history. But he just can't score touchdowns. So now onto the Atlanta Falcons side of the trade. Obviously, losing Julio Jones is going to be bad for the quarterback in Matty Ice Ice Baby. But the question is, how bad is it going to be? And that is why we got the stats right here. This is Matt Ryan splits from 2005 to 2020. But Nick, Julio Jones didn't play in 2005. I know, but this is just for the sake of the argument. In split, obviously, are going to be the games with Julio Jones, and out of split is the games without. In PPR, which is really just 4 point per passing touchdown, Julio Jones and Matt Ryan together, Matt Ryan was averaging 21.48 points per game versus 17.19 without. His interceptions with Julio Jones went down. His passing touchdowns with Julio Jones went up per game. His passing yards were going up per game. So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer that with Julio Jones, Matt Ryan is better, which obviously is a no-brainer because Julio Jones is a fucking great wide receiver, and that is going to make your quarterback much, much better. So obviously, this is bad for Matt Ryan. Now, how bad is it? I'm not sure. I don't think this means that Matt Ryan's going to be a complete and utter catastrophe for fantasy football because he still has Calvin Ridley, one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. He still has Kyle Pitts. While Kyle Pitts is still an unknown at the NFL level, from what we saw at Florida and from what we could see in the draft capital of him being a top 5 pick, they clearly believe heavily in Kyle Pitts. So I don't think this necessarily means Matt Ryan is going to fall off the edge of the earth, but it's certainly not good to lose one of the greater wide receivers in the NFL, obviously, for the quarterback. Next up here, we have wide receiver Calvin Ridley. For Calvin Ridley, I brought up the stats for last season. Last year, Julio Jones played in 8 games with Calvin Ridley, and the other 7 games were without Julio Jones. With Julio Jones, the points per game in PPR, half PPR, and standard were down compared to when Julio Jones was not in the lineup. I'm not sure if I worded that correctly, so I kind of stopped, but what I'm saying is that with Julio Jones in the lineup, Calvin Ridley was actually averaging less points per game in all formats, being half PPR, PPR, as well as standard. You can read it, obviously, on your screen. His receptions went up without Julio Jones. His touchdowns actually ended up going down per game, but his targets went up to 11.29 per game without Julio Jones, and his yards went up above 25 plus, going from 76.12 to 109.29. So clearly, without Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley was better in 2021, which was not the case actually in 2019, but was the case in 2020. Obviously, Matt Ryan is still a good quarterback, and the Atlanta Falcons are still going to be a pretty solid team from an offensive standpoint. Maybe the defense will completely suck ass again, and they won't be a very good team overall, but the offense should be relatively potent. So I think that Calvin Ridley should be solid again, and this is a good move for him, obviously making him the alpha wide receiver in this offense. Next guy to talk about is Kyle Pitts. Now, the question is, how high can we get on tight end Kyle Pitts? That's a good, genuine question because it seems like his ADP is going to continue to rise and rise and rise. And I talked about this in the tight end video, my must-draft tight ends, because I love Kyle Pitts. But frankly now, without Julio Jones, his ADP is going to hit the next fucking stratosphere. It's going to blow past our stratosphere into the next stratosphere and be hanging out with the goddamn aliens because everyone is on the Kyle Pitts hype train. You flip on a highlight tape, your eyes are going to have an orgasm. Kyle Pitts is that good of a player. So the question is, will he be worth it at the end of the day? Obviously, this move is good for him because now it takes another threat for receptions out of the offense. I already saw Julio Jones being moved coming, so this is going to be good for Kyle Pitts, who's going to be the number 2 pass catcher on this team. But the question is, how high can he get before you're just running away? Because I've seen him, he was like an 8th round pick, right? And in that case, rookie tight ends are not really known for being great in their rookie season. It kind of takes them a while to acclimate to the decent game, and then boom, maybe in their second year, kind of like TJ Hawkinson, wasn't the greatest in his rookie season. His second year, he smashes it. It takes a little bit of time for these guys to develop. But with Kyle Pitts, he's a top 5 pick. He goes so early in the draft that now people, their expectations are even higher for Kyle Pitts. So I do think he's going to be good, but understand that if he's like a top 3 round pick, top 4 fantasy pick, where he's going close to a guy like Kelsey, Kittle, and Waller, I'm going to be very afraid of it. But again, that's not really the point of this video. The point of the video is to talk about how much Julio Jones leaving impacts Kyle Pitts, and obviously it's a lot. He is now moving into that number 2 role, in my opinion, in targets on this offense. He is one of the best wide receivers on this team behind Calvin Ridley, so this obviously is very good for Kyle Pitts. And the last guy to be talking about here is wide receiver Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Russell Gage isn't necessarily the most flashy wide receiver ever in the NFL, right? He's not necessarily even a sexy name. Some people might not even know who Russell Gage is, but he is going to be the clear wide receiver 2 on the team. Does that mean he's going to be the number 2 in targets? That's kind of iffy because I think Kyle Pitts is actually better than that, but Kyle Pitts also has to kind of compete with Hayden Hurst. While he's better than Hayden Hurst, probably, he still is going to have to compete because Hayden Hurst's been in the NFL for a while, and he's still a pretty solid tight end, but Russell Gage is the second best wide receiver on this roster to me, and it is not even close, so this is very good for him. He now moves up from a category of undraftable. You don't want anything to do with him with Julio there. Even if Julio was to get hurt, then maybe get 2 games out of Russell Gage. That's about it. But now, Russell Gage has shown in prior seasons that he actually can elevate his game when put into the wide receiver 2 role in the offense, so I think Russell Gage is now a guy that I'm going to be targeting very heavily in the late rounds of my 2021 fantasy football draft. So thank you guys all so much for watching. I love you guys so much. Let me know down below what you guys think about these players. Do you guys agree with me that about each of these players, you guys think that this is good for Russell Gage? You guys think Russell Gage is even going to be a guy on this team? Do you think maybe this hurts Derrick Henry? You think maybe this helps Anthony Firkser, or it hurts AJ Brown, or it hurts Julio? Let me know down below because I'd love to have that discussion. I love you guys so much. Thank you for everything. What is today? Happy Monday, baby. I'll see you guys tomorrow on Titty Tuesday. As always, goodbye.